Hello everyone, and welcome to this weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're honored to have you here today as our guests. We appreciate your time, and we intend to give you value back for the time you invest with us. Today our webinar is the unwelcome impact of disengagement. We'll be talking about wasted resources and excessive variances that push the cost of disengagement through the roof. But the good news is that Cynthia will counsel us also on how to reverse that trend and create engagement and create a positive and sustainable growth for your company. I am Victor Dominguez. I'm the managing partner of the Ligature Group, and I'll be your host for this hour. Your presenter today is Cynthia Stewart. Cynthia Stewart is the managing partner for Evermore Services, your partner in building tomorrow businesses today. Cynthia, we want you to know a little about Cynthia, so we'll tell you that Cynthia holds her MBA and is certified by the American Society for Quality as a manager of quality and organizational excellence, as well as a Six Sigma black belt. But she's got more skills than that. In fact, she has a lot of capabilities in improving operational excellence across the board and is very adept at finding the right solution for the right company. Cynthia partners with leaders in growing high-performance organizations through a strategic and staged approach to employee development, quality improvement, and business problem solving. Cynthia is also credited with having guided thousands of people in hundreds of teams and accruing $150 million in direct savings and close to $2 billion in indirect savings. So we want to make sure that you get real value for your time here today, and we encourage you to ask questions. You can ask questions using our chat feature or our questions feature. We monitor both and just use whatever's intuitive for you. So you can put up your hand, you can ask a question, you can chat with us, and we'll make sure we work your questions into this. If you have any specific questions about a situation at your workplace, feel free to email me, Victor, at businessperformanceusa.org. We also host all of these webinars on demand for your convenience. The best way to see these webinars on demand is to sign up for Business Performance USA. And I'm going to show you real quickly what that might look like. If you go to our homepage, you can register right here to become a member. It's all free. You can go to your own wall, if you will, and then you can go to videos. And on demand, we have all of our videos here for you to watch at your convenience. There's a lot of valuable information here about running your business, and this information runs across all kinds of functional skills and soft skills as well. Now, having said that, I think it's time to turn this over to Cynthia. So we are going to change presenters and get rolling along with Cynthia's presentation. Cynthia, the ball is in your court.
Very good. Thank you, Victor. Appreciate that introduction, and it was nice to see the site there. You know, engagement is really a hot topic, and it has been, and it's growing as a hot topic as more and more research is being done that I'm going to show you some of today. But honestly, what I'm going to show you is that wasted resources and excessive variance actually push the cost of disengagement through the roof. And that's not only for companies, it's also for the economy at large, and that means it's hitting your pocketbook. Sustainable companies definitely work to reverse this unwelcome impact of engagement and disengagement. So today what I'm going to do is really talk about and identify some of the sources of disengagement. You probably are experiencing these or have experienced these yourself or perhaps in your employees. We're going to look at some associated impacts and costs of disengagement, and then I'm going to show you some ways to take action to engage workers and customers in this very important issue. So what are the benefits of reversing disengagement? You know, honestly, you're going to free up time and money. You're going to free up the productivity of your employees and create real value for your customers by improving employee engagement and productivity. And honestly, by that, you can grow your margins, basically from the inside out. So really important ways to improve your company's performance. Now this is the ugly truth, and this is one study that I saw by Dale Carnegie recently, and this is that basically 1 in 3 workers, 29%, are disengaged. That means, and there are only about 45% that are partially engaged. So a small, not even a third of your workers are kind of carrying the load for the rest of the workers in your workforce to meet your company goals. Now, when we think about disengaged, these are my words really, but I've been around disengaged people, and they're detached from their work. They don't feel connected to their peers or to the company. They're really disenchanted in general because their work life isn't really what they need, and their life in general is pretty disenchanting. And what you find is this external behavior that starts to be very disrespectful to managers and customers. They start dissing, if I can use that common language today, the company to anyone in earshot, and that includes your customers, but certainly to anyone that they live with or live near, their neighbors, their friends, any of the people that they're around. They're not talking well about your company, and that has a real impact on the goodwill of your company in the marketplace.
Cynthia, I've got a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've got a question already, and I appreciate that from our audience. It's regards to the measurement. So the question is simple. How would I know that X percentage of employees are engaged or disengaged? So I infer this is a measurement question. Now,
very good. Yeah, very good question. What these companies, there's lots of companies that are studying this and are really well known. And one is Blessing White, and there's Dale Carnegie that you see on the screen. There's Gallup Group, there's Hay Group, and what they do is they conduct surveys of companies, of employees in companies. They also do surveys of people at large, and they have over the year validated these surveys. So it's basically how employees are answering those questions. And Victor, I did not put some of those questions in this webinar, but I'll be happy to do that in the white paper so people can get a sense of that. But it's things like, you know, I enjoy my work, I feel engaged, I feel I contribute, I have a good relationship with my manager, and we're going to talk about some of those things.
So could you also, I'll just add in a little here, could you benchmark top performing employees and understand both their character traits and their productivity output, and then use that benchmark in some of your analytics for measurement?
Yes, and that's what companies who take this on a lot of companies do run engagement surveys. In fact, I conduct one, I have one that I conduct for companies, and companies then can survey their employees. Now there is, and Victor, let me get into the webinar a little bit, because there is a correlation between companies and employees that are highly engaged and the output, their performance itself.
Good idea. Thanks, Cynthia.
First, I'm going to go ahead and tee up some of the causes. Now, if you go and look at these studies, Blessing White, Dale Carnegie, Gallup, Hay Group, and all you have to do is Google employee engagement, and you'll find all kinds of studies and sources. The ones that get quoted the most are the ones that I have on the screen along with Hay Group, and I left them off by accident. But those are companies that have long-standing research, as well as there are national things like the National Bureau for Affairs. The federal government does studies, so lots of ways that you can get information on this. But basically they sum into these basic 4 categories. You have the wrong job, or it's a bad fit. It doesn't match your interests or your skills or your ability, your level of contribution, your ability to contribute. Or you have a bad manager or a bad relationship with your manager. That's a key, very, very key. Or you feel sort of trapped. You don't feel like there's any growth opportunity whatsoever. Or there are really no rewards. Nobody acknowledges your work. You don't feel like there's a way to really contribute. The salary raises aren't great. So these are things that factor in and cause disengagement or unengagement across time. Now, what this drives is this excessive variance, and one of the well-known research companies has been researching this topic for literally probably close to 80 years, and slowly over time have evolved their thinking. And they basically, in the last couple of years, did what they call a meta-analysis of over 250 studies that they had run to see if there was a correlation between a person's engagement and the performance of the company. So really what I should say is the workforce engagement kind of, so it's an average of the employees who were involved in the studies. And what they're noticing is that for companies that score high in engagement versus those that score low in engagement, when they look at their performance on things like absenteeism and turnover, there's a large variance. It starts with customer ratings, 10%, and then it goes all the way up to 65% in turnover. So those are the differences between those companies where they have run those surveys, those companies who are rating low on the employee engagement, and as you look at their performance categories, safety incidents, quality incidents, customer ratings, and so forth, what you're finding is that there's a high correlation between the level of engagement and the performance. In fact, it's 0.42 for statisticians in the audience. Now, another thing that is out there is how many ways that employees cost their companies. And honestly, if you start to add this up, all of these ways that employees cost their companies, it's going to be close to $2 trillion. And it's really phenomenal. But because of the diseases related to smoking, and smoking is stress-related typically, or workplace violence or obesity, alcohol or drug use, occupational therapy, injuries, 144 billion, 120 million in lost days, and that's engagement, how focused they are in their actual work, or stress-related illnesses and absenteeism and lost productivity, direct cause of unengagement, as well as 600 billion in thievery and fraud and 650 in smartphone use and time-wasting websites and gossip and things like that. And the list goes on. 11 billion in direct turnover costs and 65 billion lost productivity to federal agencies. So people are out there all over the place studying this. When I look at this list, I couldn't say that 100% of these are because of disengagement, but I will say this, that many of these are caused by disengagement, because disengagement causes stress on the part of the worker and the part of the people around them, and that stress leads to all kinds of acting out and lashing out. So Victor, back to your question. Is there a way to show, some kind of level of engagement with performance? And the answer is definitely.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Cynthia. Those numbers are staggering, but when I look at my own small business and a limited small number of employees, obviously I can't equate to billions of dollars, but I reference back to the percentages, so I can just simply look at the number of employees I have, look at the partially disengagement, which I can't recall, 45%, or the fully disengaged, something like 27%, and run my numbers from there.
Yes.
But of course, as a good manager, simply walking the floor and having relationships with their employees and be able to have honest dialogue with them is a really good start to understanding your level of engagement or otherwise.
Which is what's coming up. We're going to talk about that.
There you go.
Yeah. So people may be saying, well, how does this affect me personally? Especially in those situations where maybe you work alone. You're thinking, well, this is not my issue. But I want to tell you, whether you're engaged, unengaged, or disengaged, and whether you're an employee, a manager, or a business owner, or an executive, you are personally impacted by this. Why? Because There's the burden of higher prices for all those goods and services to pay that almost $2 trillion for lost productivity and injuries and diseases and so forth. Obviously higher health costs to you and everyone. We're spreading the cost, remember guys, for all of this. There is a social impact of working with unengaged and disengaged employees because they're not happy people by and large. You know, they're lashing out. Plus your quality of life is impacted, and this includes impacts to the family. There's a degraded service impact to you in what you receive as a customer. I know that I've been to many different places where I can tell there's not an engaged person sitting on the other side trying to help me with my driver's license or something else, and they are not happy people, and they treat you like, why are you in my face? There's increased stress and frustration, and there's personal morale. So yeah, you're impacted. Whether it impacts you mentally is another story, but certainly it does impact your pocketbook. Okay, now we're going to get down to the good stuff. There are basically 4 key things that companies must do. 4 key things. So how do you drive employee engagement? First of all, it really takes the right mindset and methods and strategies and structures to seedbed an adaptive and innovative culture. And I spoke about those in prior webinars and white papers. So as to give myself enough time, I will not go into that today. But basically, you know, a mindset, when we talk about mindset, I'm thinking about, you know, my employees are great problem solvers. We're going to get into this in a little bit, but it's how you look at your employees to begin with. And then what methods do you use to really build an engaging culture? And what is your strategy around how you approach your employees or view your employees? And what organizational structures do you put in place to really enable a great working environment? So those are the things that I'm talking about. So that needs to be in place, number one. And again, you want to look at my, particularly my Mighty Results webinar and the white paper that gets into what that looks like. Also, you really have to look at your hiring and placement practices because obviously you got to have the right people on the bus. I mean, when we look at the shooting that happened today with regard to, or happened yesterday with regard to the Navy contractor, clearly there were some broken practices in place, some broken structures in place that would allow this person with a gun onto that naval base. So you've got to have the right practices in place with regard to employees. And then you really need to design you have a well-designed and a well-orchestrated performance management system, and I refer back to that Mighty Results that talks about that. And what I'm going to move on to talk about in this webinar that's a little bit different, and a lot of people don't get this, but you've got to develop all employees as in adaptive problem-solving, decision-making, and leadership. Now, this is a linchpin practice right here. Developing your employees in adaptive problem-solving, decision-making, and leadership. You must make sure that your environment is such that it's not just a happy place to be, but it's a productive place to be where people can contribute. And they want to contribute. There are studies left and right that talk about people want to have meaning and purpose in their lives. They want to work in alignment with their company's purpose. They want meaningful work, and this is the linchpin activity. Meaningful work for employees is that they are able to solve problems, make decisions, and provide some level of leadership.
So Cynthia, quick observation, and I would welcome your comments. In regards to problem solving, often I find in my experience that 2 things happen when problems arise. The employee that has either created it or encountered it is often hesitant to surface that problem with others, particularly if they've created the problem themselves. In an environment with retribution, that's a very common situation. Or perhaps when a problem surfaces, the employee that is in the midst of it is brushed aside, and then the manager comes in, you know, thinking understandably to the rescue that they're there to solve the problem. So those are 2 dynamics that get in the way of problem solving, I've found, and I'd be interested in your comments, and I suspect you're going to cover that soon enough anyway.
Yeah, Victor, those comments are right on. There is no question that there has to be the right culture. And the right culture means that there is an expectation on the part of management and leadership that workers are the ones to solve the problems, and managers and leaders are there to coach people in solving the problems. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So the reason that we want to look at developing people's adaptive problem-solving capability is because humans are natural problem solvers. I mean, I have worked on untold numbers, as you heard, hundreds of different projects, thousands of people that I've been involved with in my work. And what we were about is solving problems. And what I would notice is that there was this huge aggregation of problems. I would also notice that if we were to tee up a problem, before we could even define the problem, we would just start to talk about the issues, and people would start throwing out ways to solve the problems. And so people are natural problem solvers. They're motivated by meaningful work. They want to contribute their ideas in an innovative way. In other words, they want their ideas to move the company forward. And the relationship of the manager as coach and worker as problem solver is really, really important. So let's talk about this a little bit more. But yeah, Victor, I agree with what you said. So let's take that construct and talk about it from this idea that we need to use adaptive problem solving to engage employees in daily work. What's the mindset there? Well, we need a mindset that people are great problem solvers, and we need to tap into their tacit knowledge to solve problems in real time. What I mean by that is if you've got a worker that is mixing paint, they're the best ones to know what paint, how to mix that paint, and what different colors to put in the mix, and what kind of ingredients need to go into that paint to really make it last. They're the ones that we need to go and ask. Another idea around this is when you think about farmers, what do? They go and taste the dirt. They're the ones that know what are the metals. You know, does the dirt taste right to be able to plant? Or is it lacking in some metals and nutrients that I need to change? So they literally go taste the dirt. So it's the tacit knowledge that we're really tapping into when we we say people are great problem solvers, and they need to be enabled. The whole environment needs to be set up so that they can solve problems in real time, and so they don't aggregate. So the strategy would be, employees should be trained in second-order problem solving using scientific method and aligned with company purpose. So what we're saying there is that we want to move towards the company purpose. And I've used this before, ideal patient care. So everybody knows we want to work towards ideal patient care. You could say it this way. We know that we want to provide ideal customer care. And we all want to align around that purpose. And we solve problems because we can say, was that ideal or not? And if it's not ideal, then we know we've got a problem to solve. So the strategy is that we teach employees to second-order problem solve, and then we make sure that they align their actions with the company purpose. So the structure that's required is that supervisors and leaders coach each person in second-order problem solving rather than solving the problems themselves. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I worked in teams in corporate America, and I didn't buy into this necessarily because I like to look to my front line, the folks I was working with on the front line to solve problems. But what happens a lot is that managers and leaders go into meetings and they ask everybody for all this data, so they pull together the data, and then they go about saying, okay, here's the solution, so now we got to get our employees to implement it, and they don't engage people in problem solving. Well, you don't teach them if you don't engage them in the problem solving. And a lot of what happens is that workarounds are the expected norm of the day, so you've got to get rid of the norm that says employees, leaders and managers are the problem solvers. If you want to engage your workforce, you're going to engage them directly in problem solving. So the method is that employees identify problems when they arise. They engage those that are affected, and you give them the training and so they understand process, who's upstream, who's downstream, and who's affected. And then you have a small group pulled together in an ad hoc way in a short time frame to identify and test solutions until they get to it over a period of a few days.
Thanks, Cynthia. That actually answers my question quite well, so I appreciate that. Just a quick note, sometimes I find when I work with clients and the frontline workers, they tell me that their boss has no idea what they do, which is a fascinating comment, but it's unusually common. And the boss actually sitting down, learning from that employee and learning how that employee solves problems, I think goes a long ways to solving all of these issues and creating stronger relationships.
Well, you know, Victor, Toyota Production System is one of the most studied companies out there. And for years, people were trying to use their lean practices, but they were kind of missing something. And so Toyota went to Harvard and asked for them to study their management style because they didn't see it in anything that was written. And so a couple of guys, Spear and Bowen, went out and worked for them for 4 years to uncover their DNA. And what's so interesting about the way they work is that they actually have 9 levels of hierarchy. And when I heard that, I was floored, because to me that looks like sending information up and down. It's not really meant to be that way. The way they work, and this is really what we need to think about and consider emulating, the way they work is that they have a supervisor over employees on the line. The minute there's a problem on the line, and things change every day, it's amazing because of material, all kinds of things. There's lots of reasons. Every day there's something going on with the line. And so they raise the red flag, so to speak, and the manager, supervisor comes there not to solve the problem, but to coach the person in solving the problem, and also to coach the person in identifying who else, you know, upstream or downstream, do we need to get involved in this. So the supervisors, the reason they have so many is because they're all engaged, and they need a fluid way to move supervisors around on the floor because it shifts. They understand that it shifts constantly. So really different way of working, what I'm talking about here, but it's kind of embedded in these thoughts.
Thanks, Cynthia.
So the problem with typical problem-solving behaviors is kind of what you described there, Victor, in that, you know, the employee says, well, I've got a problem, and either they do a workaround because they don't want to go to their boss and look dumb because they aren't solving the problem themselves, or they go to their boss and their boss takes it on. But either way, it's not effective. So in a study that was conducted on frontline workers by Harvard Business School by one of those researchers I talked about earlier, Spear, I believe it was, that what they noticed is the typical approach to problem solving, and I think this will ring with most of you. Do what it takes to continue the care of the customer or the patient, or make sure the line continues, right? You don't raise a red flag. Use sort of this sequential trial and error to find a solution. And a lot of the problems typically are lack of resources or lack of information. You don't have one or the other. Things are not, you go out, I worked in the electric company, they go out to the line and people say, they give them a map of the facilities they're going to go work on, it doesn't match, so lack of information. So that's typically what people encounter, is a lack of information or lack of material. And so they'll go, if they don't have paper for the printer and they've got to print something, they'll go to someone else's cubby and they'll take their paper and not do anything else about it. And that's typical when people are lacking material. They'll go take it from wherever they can find it to finish the task at hand, serve the customer, serve the patient, and they don't do anything to resolve the problem, the larger problem. What they typically do is involve the people they're most comfortable with. So their friends, look, I got a problem here. They don't want to go to the ones that maybe have the most knowledge or the most authority or that's their upline. They want to go to the people that they're most comfortable with. Now, we want them to go to their leaders, their supervisors, and because we want them to be the people they're most comfortable with. But if they're not, that's a problem. So rather than the people that are best able to solve the problem, they go to people they're most comfortable with. And some other problems, just to continue this, is that the worker's expected to find the best workaround to a problem to complete the task. They don't want to look stupid, they don't want to look like they don't know their work, blah, blah, blah. So they go do the best workaround. And the environment does not enable or support the worker to put in place a permanent solution, because they're saying, look, we got bigger fish to fry. You shouldn't be solving those small problems. The solutions they put in place in the majority of cases create more problems, and they aggregate and they become big, expensive problems. There is a snowball effect when you don't make sure that you're getting at the root cause of every problem, no matter how large it is. I don't care if wheelchairs on the floor are your problem. I don't care if people can't park when they come to the outpatient clinic. I don't care if any kind of what seems to be a small problem. It's better by solving the small problems. They don't aggregate. And what you find is typically, and I'm going to give you a story here in a minute that'll illustrate this beautifully. Typically, people do a workaround. So the worker, they never learn the negative impact of their actions, and they don't learn proper problem-solving capability. And all of that aggregation of problems really has a tendency to cause great stress in the problems. So there was a study that was done on nurses. You hear me talk a lot about healthcare because it's top of mind for most people these days, a lot of companies certainly. So nurses, they did a long-term impact study. They watched nurses, observed nurses, and they found out that a good 30% of their time was running around looking for what they needed. Now, this may be something as important as a bradycardia for a heart patient, and unfortunately, they can't get those supplies and those materials. They're not at hand when they need them. So really big impact. And I bet if you study any company in America, you will see that kind of waste in the environment where people don't have what they need when they need to do the job. So I'm going to get at now some ways. There's 6 steps, and this will come close to wrapping up this webinar for today. There's 6 steps, and I've mentioned some of these. Obviously, if you're teaching people second-order problem solving, then you're teaching them to remove the root causes to actually solve the problem. And you need to make this either an implied or an explicit part of their job and allow time for the improvements to occur. Now, people so often get so wrapped up in, I've got to do this by this time, and if I take time to solve that problem, I'm going to waste my time. I'm not going to get my job done. And that kind of thinking leads us into bigger and bigger problems. If we allow time for problems to be solved today when those problems arise, we're gaining time. We're not losing time. We also need to allow for frequent opportunities for workers to communicate and give feedback to those supplying materials and information. So what that means is that there needs to be this communication that's ongoing between upstream, downstream, the suppliers of materials and information to exchange what the problems were they encountered, what they need to do about them, and how they solve the problem. So there needs to be an understanding that we don't need silos. We need people working together in a team and communicating frequently how things are going so that they are able to solve problems as they arise. We also need to empower workers to signal a problem, no matter how large or small, when it occurs, and give them the proper attention, give them time and the proper support, if you will, the coaching, to from the right persons to actually solve the problem. Further, we need to assign leaders who coach the worker in removing the root cause, not solving the problem themselves and saying, well, just give me the data and I'll solve it and tell you what to do later. We need to encourage solution generation, experimentation, and consideration of longer-term consequences. The thing that happens when you work this way with people, and I saw this on my teams, the more I would give them, equip them, enable them, empower them to solve problems and find the solutions, the better they became at solving the problems and evaluating their potential solutions. In other words, they got better and better at saying, okay, here's a problem, brainstorming the answer, and then evaluating it. So what is the consequence if we do that? And getting feedback on it and communicating about it. They got better and better and better, and they became really good problem solvers. So you got to encourage that in the workforce. And lastly, you need to recognize and publicize successful problem-solving efforts to make people aware of all the benefits. If people know, if you really want to set the tone for problem-solving, then you need to reward and award that kind of behavior. And people, that needs to be very visible. You need to really celebrate the workers that are solving these problems every day and the leaders that are coaching them to solve those problems. So Victor, any questions on those approaches?
Yeah, I do. I have a question, Cynthia, and the key words with, if you will, are control and chaos. Managers who have been trained traditionally, and that I presume would describe most managers, believe they need to exert a measure of control over systems and processes, and if they do not, they are risking or inviting chaos. So what we're talking about here, what you're talking about, is problems occur within systems or processes. So is that, first of all, correct? Is that where we could summarize problem occurrences?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so what we have here, what you're suggesting, is employees themselves change systems and processes, and does that not remove the control measures that managers so passionately seek to keep under their thumb?
Really, there's a dispersion of control, Victor. So managers that work in this fashion are not the ones exerting control. What workers understand is that, and this is a great idea, the manufacturing line, they want to keep the line moving. They understand that. The natural thing is to keep the line moving no matter what and not to look at the waste, the products. I've been through a glass plant in my area, and not to look at the waste, and not to look at why there's waste. The truth is that control becomes everybody's responsibility, and the way they are controlling is by stopping things long enough to solve the problems. Because what happens in chaos is that problems aggregate and begin to tumble all around themselves. And that's true whether it's mental health in the case of the shooter, all of his problems aggregated, or these young shooters who go out. We aren't setting up systems that really help and enable them get better and move towards health. So we're talking about companies moving towards health. Everyone is in charge of that because they know what their purpose is. Their purpose is ideal manufacturing, or ideal customer care, or ideal patient care. They get that, and that's what they want. And so they're exerting their control. And while it may look somewhat chaotic if you set the environment correctly, there's actually a broader scope of control in that they're not letting problems escalate, snowball, and dominate what everybody's running around trying to do. So there's a much higher level of calm, much higher level of acceptability between people that problems are going to occur. Let's just work together to solve them. Much higher acceptability of the front line having tacit knowledge. So all of that in the end exerts a better environment for business to be done and results to be achieved, and for workers to feel like they're being valued and to feel like they're satisfied with their job and to feel like they're making a contribution.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia.
So what we're doing is we're kind of turning things on their head. The traditional wisdom in management is really not working. It's causing huge complexity, all these big systems, all this information, and yet there's a huge lack of simple, just let's get it done, let's stick to the purpose, let's solve these problems so they don't aggregate. So traditional methods are just not really working. Let me give you a real life example. There was a nurse, and this is a true story. There was a nurse, and this was before I don't know if many of you know, but October 14th, huge changeover in the laws around billing and coding, for patients with their hospital care or their doctor care. So now there's a lot of legislation in place and a lot more bureaucracy in place to deal with this problem. But so technically it's not supposed to happen tomorrow. It's been happening up until October 14th though. A nurse is working for a hospital that serves indigent patients who are unable to pay for their care. Now she's been working in this adaptive mode, and so she's enabled to solve problems, and that means any problem. So she goes to code something as simple, a simple item, right? She goes to the code sheet. Well, it's not on there. Well, it's less than a dollar, okay? So, they've been ignoring it. Oh, we don't have to worry about that. But she goes, well, no, maybe we should really look into this because there's no way I can code this. And every penny counts when we're trying to get reimbursement from the government. We have to have everything coded properly. And so she raises the red flag, so to speak. She says, look, this is not on this coding sheet. There's no way I can code for it, which means there's no way to bill for it, which means there's no way we're going to get reimbursed for it. And so her supervisor, and the reason I stopped is because they called it the learner, leader, teacher model. The leader on her line says, oh, yeah, well, let's call in supply chain and let's call in accounting. I think the three of us need to work on this. And so they went to work and they discovered it wasn't just that one little item that she couldn't find, which turned out, I was trying to remember what the item is, but it's less than $1. Turned out that within a month, they identified $625,000 they were losing annually. So it took a few more months to implement all the solutions, but within a month they had identified $625,000 because this one person said, I know that it's okay if I say that's a problem. I can't code this $1 item, which means we can't bill this $1 item. So that's a story of how it's supposed to work, and it's a real life story.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, just on one simple thing, and just think about it. I can't help but think of the book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. I'm beginning to believe that if you will sweat the small stuff and take care of the small stuff, the big stuff starts to go away, and that's what people are experiencing when they set up their environment in this way. And just really in summary, Victor, prevailing management approaches assume managers or specialized teams, and I was one of them and lots of these, should, yes, collect data, absolutely had to have our data, had to show the facts, we had to analyze it, and then we had to solve the big problems. Well, we ignored the small problems, right? And in doing so, one of the teams that I worked on, we identified over 100 problems, and we knew that was just skimming the surface. And it had to do with customer service, and we were skimming the surface. In fact, it had to do with interruption of service, which meant that people were without power. Very big problem. And what we found is that there were so many, it was an aggregate of so many problems. We could only, in 1 year, we could only solve 100 of them. And we knew that we could keep going for probably another 10 years to solve all the rest. Now, unwritten norms drive workarounds and problems aggregate. So we're frustrating our workers and we're creating significant aggregated problems that are costing us, guys, costing us billions, and we're creating huge complexity. So the way our traditional management methods are failing us. We've got to move to the news story. We've got to move on and set up the environment for engagement. And by doing this simple problem, by approaching it from a problem solving, training people to do problem solving, decision making and leading, we are going to see higher and higher levels of engagement in our workers. Okay, Victor.
Wow. Okay, that's great. Let me see if I can summarize this myself quickly, Cynthia. So we're talking about problem solving. We've identified that problems occur within systems and processes. Problems also occur within people, but that's not really our subject today. Let's assume that a company is hiring well and managing well, and they have good people, well-meaning, that want to find passion and purpose in their job. So the problem solving is, when I look at the nurses example and all the people they had to bring in, it's really a process of learning as well. So problem solving is learning, and the way you propose it, it's social learning. It's social so that because you bring in a number of people who this problem affects and is related to, and that social learning process is really a key to engagement or creating engagement in the workforce. Is that a reasonable summary?
That is a very good summary.
Okay. I've learned something. Very cool.
There you go.
Okay. All right, folks, this is, I have no other questions pulled up. Let me check one more time just to be fair and accurate. So we are wrapped up for today, and we thank Cynthia Stewart, based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the top entrepreneurial cities in the country. And Cynthia's series here are the Problem Solvers series. We've just had the Unwelcome Impact of Disengagement. Cynthia, next we'll be talking about 4 rules to engagement, and lastly, following this series with problem solving is your silver bullet. We encourage you to watch all of those and watch them on demand if that works best for you. Our next 3 webinars are the truths about background screening. If you are acquiring talent for your company, and really who isn't, you need to know the basics about background screening so you really understand who you are hiring and how they will fit. Next is high-tech marketing with a human touch. That's me. That's learning to be authentic with your digital and technology marketing so that you can create true relationships. Lastly is change execution. Dr. Jeff Stewart, managing change through organizational and optimally, I'm stumbling here, but through top line and synchronized execution with your company. So we appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone.